Hi and welcome to the OhSewGecko channel. Today's tutorial is the Book Bestie by Carolina Little Stitches. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for allowing me to film your pattern today. I had so much fun filming it and I'm really excited with the results. So this is a beginner level sewing pattern, so anybody can have a go, and there's lots of different choices for the flap or tab at the top. So here's mine. So this is the largest size of the Book Bestie. I've used cork on the exterior of mine, as always, and I've had a go at quilting it as well, just to give it a little bit of extra texture. The flap on the top, I've made a few little changes to that. I've added this band across and I've changed things just a little bit, but I'll show you exactly how I did that using the pattern pieces that come with this pattern. Inside, there is loads and loads of space. And it can fit quite a large book, this one. The largest book I could find, actually. School Spanish Dictionary. This is not what I'm planning on putting in it, but it fits. So let's have a look. It fits in really, really nicely. Still got some space around it. Okay. And it closes up perfectly with the closure at the front. So just to give you an idea, this book measures about, let's have a look. This book measures about 8.5 inches by 6 inches, and it's about 2 inches deep. So that tells you it's quite a large book cover. With this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to quilt on cork. Also, on the interior, I've used a fusible foam. So I'll show you how to quilt using that. If at any point while I'm sewing you think you really enjoyed this video, please consider clicking that like button and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any future videos. The weather here is still a little bit crazy. It is February. It is brilliant sunshine, but we have got gale force winds again. So there is a little bit of howling wind here and there. I hope you'll forgive me for that. But for now, let's get sewing this Book Bestie. So today I've got two pattern piece A. These are cut from cork fabric. This cork actually came from the Gecko Box Winter, so I'm really excited to use this. So that's my outer, and then I've got two pattern piece A lining fabrics. These I've interfaced with a non-woven fusible interfacing. I like the non-woven one because I like the structure that it gives. For the flap at the top, I'm doing option B3, which is the flap that goes across. Now this should have a presser stud or something for closure, but I don't have any at the moment that I'm really happy with. So what I'm actually going to do is I've cut a strap across and I'm going to use that instead. So I've got two of my B3. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to leave this as a raw edge. So normally you would put them right sides together and turn through, but because I'm using cork for both, I'm just going to put them together, leave them the extra chunky size as well because I quite like that. I'll show you that in a bit. Lastly is the interfacing. Now, in the pattern, it's suggested to use fusible fleece, but with cork, fusible fleece doesn't always work quite so well. It's not quite the same because the cork is quite thick. So I'm actually going to use fusible foam for this, and then I'm going to quilt it so it will give it that nice puffy texture. So those are all my pattern pieces. It's a nice, quick, simple sew, this one. So let's get started. So I'm going to start by fusing the foam onto the back of the cork. Now I've cut this foam smaller than the outer. So the seam allowance on this pattern is 3/8 of an inch. I've actually cut it a little bit smaller than that. So I've cut it 1/2 inch smaller around all the sides because when you're sewing with foam, it tends to be a little bit puffy, and obviously with cork it's that bit thicker. So I think by doing it a 1/2 inch distance, it should be a little bit easier to sew. So I'm going to stick that onto the back. I'm going to do that on both pieces. I've drawn some lines using a chalk marker from corner to corner, and I'm going to stitch across those two lines, and then I'm going to use my presser foot to mark the next lines that I need to do either side. That way I know that if my measuring is a little bit off, it doesn't matter, because I know that my presser foot and the measurements on my machine are all correct. So I was going to do stitching both ways, but actually I quite like this. So I'm just going to take a damp cloth and rub off the chalk markings, and I think I'm just going to leave it that way. But now I need to add my label on. So I'm trying to think where to place it. I've got the centre is coming down here. Obviously it'll be a little bit shorter than this once it's attached. I'm thinking maybe here. I need to stay away from the seam allowance. Obviously I don't want it too far over, but I think that will work. So just take my glue pen. I think about there should be quite nice. Once we fold that under and in, maybe a little bit further over. I'm going to put it there. No, I get that stitched on. I'm really, really happy with those. So let's put this to one side, over there. And we're going to move on to the flap. Now this is pattern piece B3. And as I said before, normally this would be an outer and lining, right sides together, stitch them around, and then you would add a snap to the front of it. I'm not going to add a snap. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put these two right sides together. I'm going to keep that seam allowance because I quite like the fact that this is that bit thicker. I'm going to stitch around the edge. I'm going to do it at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, so 2 or 3 millimeters. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a second row of stitching just for decorative purposes. There we are, so that's all stitched in place. Quite happy with that. I've used my rotary cutter and I've just trimmed up any little edges that were overhanging, and I'm going to take a lighter. I'm just going to burn off any fuzzy bits that are left behind. Burn the threads as well while we're here. I know this bit won't get seen, but that doesn't matter. There we go. So because I'm using cork, I'm also going to seal the edges. Now, I'm not a huge fan of edge coat, so what I tend to do is use a fabric glue. Now, I can't get a lot of different fabric glues because I'm in the south of Spain. It's a little bit difficult. So I use this one. It's an Aptly fabric glue. That's all it is. It's nothing fancy. It's washable, so means it's somewhat waterproof. And so this is the one I use, but you can use any fabric glue, will be absolutely fine. You don't necessarily have to use this one. So let's open this up. I'm just going to dab little drops onto the edge. Okay, you see that? And I'm going to take this. This is called a leather edge roller, and it's what's used with edge coat. So I'm just going to roll that along. You need to be really careful. Try not to let it get on your cork because it will leave like a shiny mark behind. Okay, you can see that. And we're just going to do that all the way around. And set that to one side to dry. So while this piece is drying, let's start on this tab. Now this is not in the pattern instructions, this is an extra that I'm adding on. So again, I'm using a raw edge, so I'm just going to burn the edges along, just make sure that they are not fuzzy. Okay. I'm going to take this across to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch a line around 1/8 of an inch in from the edge. And then I might do another decorative stitch afterwards. Okay, so that's all stitched around and threads trimmed, a little bit wonky, but that's okay. Like I said, it's for me. So the same as with the flap, we're just gonna go around the edge with some fabric glue just to seal it. If you wanted, you could do 2 of these straps and sew them right sides together. I'm not too worried. I think it will be okay. Now we're going to attach our flap to the panel that's the back. Okay, so this one is the front because I've got my label on it. So I put that over to one side and we're working with this one, which is the back panel. So I'm going to find the midpoint at the top. Just fold that together. Push that down. There we go. I'm going to do the same with this. Oh, decide which way around I want it. I think I want it that way. Okay, line those up and clip that in place. Now I'm going to stitch across this top edge, basting it in place with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. There we go, so that's attached there at the top, and this is exterior sides together. So this is the front and this is the exterior and this is the exterior. So this is the underside. So when it closes, it will close like this. Okay, so to place my strap on the front, I'm actually going to use the pattern piece. So I'm just going to lay that, let's find the centre of both. Centre of my pattern piece. Ooh. And the centre here. And I'm going to lay my pattern piece on top and I'm going to bring it up about 1 inch. Okay, so that tells me more or less where my tab is going to go, and then I'm going to place, let's make sure that's centered. And place that on top. I'm just going to take some sticky tape just to hold that in place so as I know it's not going to move. Just at the moment, leave that out of the way. Okay, make sure that's lined up. I'm going to use my sticky tape to hold that. Do one more just for safety, just to make sure it doesn't move anywhere. I'm going to make sure that's level. And then I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew a box on each end, about 1 inch on each end. There we are, that's stitched in place. I've added a little bit of stitching there as well. So take this tape off now. Yeah. I'm going to bring this across. Now it won't quite fit properly. I'm just going to check that this fits before I move on. Actually, that is perfect. So let's move on to the next step. Okay, so I've got my outers and I've got my 2 lining pieces. So I'm going to put my outers right sides together and I'm going to clip those in place, and I'm going to do the same thing with my lining. There we are, so that's both those clipped together. Now with the outer, I'm going to stitch from this top edge here down the side to the bottom here, back stitching well, then I'm going to jump across to here, stitch across the bottom, back stitching well at the beginning and the end, and then I'm going to jump across to here and stitch back up the other side, back stitching well at the end. With the lining, we need to leave a turning gap here at the bottom. So I've got my red for stop and green for go. Oh, that's upside down. That helps me to remember because I'm terrible for forgetting to leave a turning gap. So red stop, green go. I'm going to start at the top, stitch down the side, back stitching well, beginning and end, jump across to here, stitch as far as my red stop clip, back stitch really, really well, jump across to my green go clip, back stitch well there as well, and stitch to the end, back stitching well, jump across here, and stitch all the way to the very end, back stitching really, really well, beginning and end there, and making sure that on both pieces I leave the tops open. Don't want to stitch those closed accidentally. So I'm going to do a second row of stitching now, just for extra security. There we are, so that's both of those sewn around the 3 edges, top left open, and the lining, obviously I've got my turning gap. I did remember my bobbin ran out. There's a surprise after all that quilting, but that's fine. So what we're now going to do is on the top edges here, we're just going to trim back the seam allowances. Outer at the top, we're just going to trim that top edge down by half, reduce that a little bit. We'll do the same on this side. Same with this, just trim it down by half. This will just reduce the bulk when we come to sew these together. So now let's box these corners. I'm going to start with the outer, put the lining over there. So we've got our corners, I'm going to reach in. These are quite small. Now any other fabrics you can press open these seams. Because I'm using cork, I can't do that. But that's okay, it doesn't matter. So we're just going to reach in, squash this down. It's okay, it'll be fine. And I'm going to nest the seams together. So I'm going to open them out and butterfly them like that and clip that in place. You want to make sure that your seams, this one and this one, are together, not just at the end, actually quite far down. That will make sure that you've got a nice sharp angle, and then when you've stitched, those seams will be joined together. So actually, I'm going to clip here at the sides to hold this in place. See, the foam is fighting me a little bit. There we go. There we are. I'm going to do the same on the other corner, and then I'm going to do the same with the lining fabric. Let's put that to there for the moment. Just show you on the lining fabric. Let's open this out. A little bit easier on the lining. Now with the lining, you've got a choice. You can do either the same I've done with the outer, where you can butterfly them open, or you can nest them in opposite directions. So this one wants to go this way, this one wants to go this way. So we can nest, make sure that the seams go all the way down together. Actually, I think I'm going to butterfly this. Because I'm using the non-woven, it actually creases really nicely, so I don't have to iron. Anything to say that I don't have to iron. There we go. And then we're going to do the same on this side. So I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch these together with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance that's on the outer and the lining. There we are, so that's stitched closed. I'm just going to trim that up a little bit just to make it a little more even. Those little ends, that one's okay. This is okay. Just take a little bit off there. Okay. This is all coming together. We're almost finished. So I'm keeping my lining wrong side out. I'm going to turn the exterior the right way. It's going to be exciting to see this. Let's turn this through. Is a little bit more difficult because of the foam, obviously, but that's okay. Let's push out that corner. Now is the time to check if there's anything weird and crazy going on. If you've missed anything or you think you need to double stitch the seam a bit better, I'm actually okay with that. It's pulling a little, but it's okay. There we go. Oh, this is going to look amazing. Right, so we're going to put our outer inside the lining. Now, it can be a little bit tricky. It might be a little bit tight. Don't worry about that. That's not a problem. Just put that in there. Okay. Now, we need to match up the seams. Make sure they're lined up well. I'm going to nest them against each other like this and clip them in place. Same with the other seam. Let's match that up. Clip that in place. There we go. I'm going to clip all the way around the top. If you find that this is fighting you a little bit, just push this down. It doesn't matter what's going on down here. What matters is that around the top, everything lines up properly, and actually that's lining up really, really well. I'm quite happy with that. Let's get that clipped. So we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch around the whole of the top with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so you'll see I've double stitched it for 2 reasons. Firstly, because I always like to double stitch seams anyway when I'm using cork, but also because it's a little bit wobbly here and there. So then the second time round, I can always make sure that it's nice and neat. I also back stitched really, really well here. This is where that tab is. You can see it. So I just back stitched well there just for a little bit extra security. Okay, I'm going to trim down this seam allowance ever so slightly, not a lot, but just a little, because it's cork and it can be a little bit bulky when it comes to top stitching. So let's trim that down just a little. I'm not trimming down the top of the flap. I'm going to leave that, but I am going to take out some more of this seam here because that will get quite bulky. So I'm just trimming it down by half, so especially around that corner. There we go. So I've left that tab there. I did cut it a little. Okay, let's turn this through. So this is going to be challenging because of the foam. We're just going to take our time. We'll start by pushing the exterior down, actually, because what I want to do is I want to crush it into a ball inside, make it easier to come through. Then I'm going to find one of the corners. There it is. I'll pull that through first. I'm going to find the other corner, which is over here somewhere. Get those out and then start pushing from the inside. It's really a lot of scrunching up, really. There we go. And this is where we need to backstitch really, really well. You can see my seams popped a little. That's okay. I can fix that. So push out the corners of the lining. Just pull that through. Make sure that's all okay. Put that together. That's fine. Right. And reach inside here. Make sure that everything here is pushed out well. Flatten that down. Same on the back. Yeah, that's all good. And we're going to push this lining back inside the outer. Oh, this is looking so good. I love these two fabrics together. Let's roll that seam, get that to sit down. Bit of thread. There we go. Right, so I'm going to go around, I'm going to clip all of that in place. Okay, so that's all clipped around the top. Now, here, we need to make sure that we've stitched really, really carefully because this is quite bulky here now. So I'm going to stitch across carefully here. And we're going to go all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. 1/4 inch is about 5 or 6 millimeters. Okay, last thing to do is pull the lining out and tug on it. I'm going to clip that in place all the way along that open seam. There we are, so I've clipped along there. Now, because I popped this seam when I was pulling my bag through, I'm actually going to stitch all the way from the very end here across to the other end just to make sure, and then that will close that up and we won't have any problems. And there we are, all finished. All sealed up inside. Flap works perfectly, really happy with that. There's my Book Bestie, all ready for my books.